service when we enter into our time of meditation. This time of meditation where we affirm, I am grounded and centered and present in the truth. And now I invite you to just gently close your eyes and to just breathe, allowing the breath to just flow naturally. Just becoming relaxed and allowing the weight of the floor or your chair or your cushion to just support the body. And I invite you to bring your awareness to your feet. Feeling the smooth earth, the floor, the nice, cool, refreshing, welcoming ground as you begin to feel your feet root to Mother Earth. Just beginning to firmly ground you in the center of your truth, and just to ground you to all that is, to the life-giving sustenance that the earth provides. And now I invite you to visualize with me. Visualize roots beginning to grow from the bottoms of your feet, moving down into the earth. And as these roots grow and expand, you feel yourself rooting more and more firmly into the center of your being. Roots traveling further and further down into the earth, closer and closer to the core of the planet. And down in the center of the earth, I ask you to visualize a pulsing, white, radiant light. The roots coming from your feet and wrapping around that pulsing radiant light, tethering you more and more firmly, rooting you stronger and stronger to the earth. And as we prepare to enter into our moment of silence, I invite you to allow yourself to feel this pulsing white light moving up through the roots, up into the bottoms of your feet and throughout your body. And as this occurs, a white light, a shield, begins to radiate around your body, begins to provide this shield of protection, protecting all that is good and protecting you from harm, keeping all that's good inside of this shield, feeding your body. And I invite you to further visualize this and just allow it to be, and allow yourself to feel this as we enter into our moment of silence. And as we begin to bring our attention and our focus back into this present moment, we know that we are now firmly rooted into the ground. We are allowing our divine nature to feed the earth, and we are in turn allowing the earth to feed us. Our ever-growing link to the divine or the Christ consciousness. And we take this with us, even outside of this Sunday service. We take this with us into our daily lives. And we affirm here today, I am grounded. I am centered. I am present in the truth, in my truth. And we say, so it is, and namaste. And we further affirm our divinity and our divine nature as we move into our new Lord's Prayer with Pete. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Rachel. I have to say that I am now feeling at peace, and I think, I appreciate that, Pete, because I think it's very important to have things right now that we can take with us, especially during those times when, we may be feeling a little fear or uncertainty. It's important to have that to always go back to that focus that helps to keep us centered and helps us to realize and to recognize and acknowledge that no matter what's going on, we still have that connection to the divine within. And that's nothing that anything outside of us can take away. So thank you for that. So today is Palm Sunday already, and I have to admit that, last week I attended this webinar online with Unity Ministers, and somebody's like, hey, it's Palm Sunday next Sunday. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had already forgotten that it was already that time. And I'm thinking it might have been a little embarrassing to have come up here and been like, hey, Palm Sunday's next week. Being a minister, I probably should know that. But anyway. So a little story about Palm Sunday and about just Holy Week and things like that in general. Now my last Unity congregation was outside of Portland in this suburb called West Lynn. And there was a week right before Holy Week that my administrator Sharon and we were invited to a breakfast with West Lynn Lutheran, which was right across the street. And we're all sitting there talking, just having a good talk together, and they kind of start going around the table because there's a few different ministers and representatives from other churches there, and those churches were probably a little bit more traditional than what Unity is. And so they all start going around the table, and they're like, hey, what are you doing for Holy Week? And I'm kind of sitting there thinking, oh no, what am I going to tell them when it comes around to me? Because a lot of Unity churches, Holy Week isn't even in the vocabulary. In fact, I've probably only ever been to one other one that actually acknowledged or said something about Holy Week. So, I tried to explain this to them. But even growing up Baptist, at my specific church, we never talked about Holy Week. I grew up at an independent Baptist church, and I think it's kind of like Unity, where each one can kind of, get into their own groove and kind of customize it and tailor it a little bit for your own situation and congregation. So I had never really heard much of Holy Week. At my church, we just celebrated Easter, and that was pretty much it. The one I grew up in just never mentioned Holy Week. Now, I'd heard certain things that are considered a part of Holy Week. And to be honest, after Sharon and I had met with West Lynn Lutheran, I had to go home and do a little bit of homework to find out what all was involved in Holy Week. And this kind of information is good to know, especially with today being Palm Sunday. So I learned something new. I learned that Holy Week includes Palm Sunday, which is today, Holy Wednesday, which is Spy Wednesday. It's also referred to as Spy Wednesday. I thought that was kind of interesting. Sounded kind of cool a little bit there. Maundy Thursday, which I've also saw referred to as Holy Thursday. Good Friday or Holy Friday. And then Holy Saturday and the Passover, which begins on Friday and leads up to Easter Sunday. And there may be more in there, and if there are, please, I'm open to education. So when we meet back in person again, I would like to know what those are. But I'm sure many of you have guessed by now that at Unity, we don't read and study the Bible in a literal sense. Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore studied the Bible as more of a history and an allegory, more of like from a textbook standpoint, if you will. They interpret it as a metaphysical representation of each soul's evolutionary journey towards spiritual awakening. Now, Unity understands the Bible more as a complex collection of writings that have been compiled over many centuries, and that the Bible is a very valuable spiritual resource and definitely not something to be forgotten in Unity teachings. But it's also understood as a reflection of the comprehension and inspiration of the writers in their times. So back to our meeting at Westland Lutheran, I explained as our turn came up and they asked what we were doing for Holy Week. I explained how different Unity churches choose how they celebrate Holy Week, or not in some instances. But I also mentioned about how we tend to more metaphysically interpret Easter and all of the events that lead up to Easter. So I want to start a little bit with today. I want to start today with Palm Sunday, kind of the kickoff to Holy Week, if you will. Now, this parable is found in the Bible in John 12, verses 12 through 50. And I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll kind of paraphrase it just a little bit. This is said to be the Sunday before the death of Jesus. So at this point, word had spread far and wide about Jesus' abilities and how he was out and about just healing people. Word had spread that he was on his way to Jerusalem at that point. And the people were excited. And as Jesus began to get closer to the city and actually enter the city of Jerusalem, the crowd began to gather. And they began to lay palm branches across the road, welcoming Jesus. And this was a sign of royal treatment. When they would lay palm branches out onto the road, this was a sign of royal treatment, along with goodness and victory. Now, first, I want to talk a little bit about Jerusalem and what Jerusalem signifies, what it means. During that time, Jerusalem was seen as the holy city. And you'll find mentions of Jerusalem in many places throughout the Bible. And I've learned that when something is mentioned many times in the Bible, it's usually telling me, hey, you need to stop and pay attention to this and what this might mean. So the way I understand it, the Hebrew interpretation for the city of Jerusalem is shalem, which is derived from the same root as the word shalom, which, as Pete told us a little while ago, means peace. So that the common interpretation of the name of Jerusalem is city of peace, or sometimes abode of peace. And the metaphysical interpretation is based off of this definition, and it symbolizes the habitation of peace within each one of us. Now, according to Charles Fillmore in his book, Keep a True Lent, Jerusalem is the abiding consciousness of spiritual peace, the result of continuous realizations of spiritual power tempered with spiritual poise and confidence. So what does that mean exactly for us today, maybe in just more common, simple English? Well, one of the things about metaphysical interpretation that I like the most about it is that my meaning may be different from your meaning. I mean, we've got Charles Fillmore's hefty metaphysical dictionary, and if you've never seen it, when you come back to the church, go down to the lending library, you'll see it down there, and that thing, I mean, it's thick. You can also find a free copy online at Truth Unity, but it's a thick dictionary. And this is meant as a guide to help us, but it's also very important that you always approach metaphysical interpretation, or when you read the parables of the Bible, that you approach those and think about them and think on them as whatever they may mean to you at that specific time. That may change for you from day to day, and that's okay. It's important to sit and think about what it really means to you. And I urge you to just pay attention and to be open to it and just kind of flow with it. Just kind of let what comes. So back to the result of continuous realizations of spiritual power. To me, that means self-actualization and enlightenment. For some of us, we may find that it's not the destination of reaching Jerusalem that's important. For some, it will be more the journey itself rather than that ultimate destination. Some of us will reach Jerusalem and then we're going to leave it again. We'll kind of step a foot in, say, hey, this is a nice place, but I'm going to go and do something else for now. Some are going to hang around on the outskirts, kind of just in the suburbs, in the strip malls, and that's okay too. The main thing is that you at least travel there and drop in for the occasional day in the city and check it out and see what it's got available. You may become aware that the abode of peace exists and you enjoy it while you're there. Hey, this is a pretty peaceful place to be. I think I'll hang out for a while. Now, my own journey to Jerusalem, when put into practical terms, is the ability to feel my own spirit and to experience my higher self. That direct alignment with God, with Source. When I do that, I'm able to experience that peaceful place, my very own Jerusalem. Now, there are times when I've been in Jerusalem and maybe not even known. Just because we cross into the city doesn't mean that we're going to be met with crowds that are holding palms or laying them down for us. And I say this because it's not fair to put pressure on yourself to achieve an extremely specific feeling, to know that you have achieved an enlightened state. Sometimes it's just as simple as feeling peaceful regardless as to whatever it is that's going on around you. Sometimes it's just a feeling of feeling satisfied or just at peace in any given moment. Now, some of you have heard me talk about my sister before. And I hope she's not watching right now because I'm going to bring her up. But anyway, some of you heard me mention my sister before. And some of you know by now that we don't agree politically, and she loves to remind me of that, especially when I least expect it. So one day before all this COVID stuff started, I'm just enjoying my early morning coffee, reading my little daily devotional, just minding my own business, kind of getting ready for my day, thinking, I'm going to go to the church. It's going to be nice and peaceful up there. And my little text notification goes off on my phone. Now, this text didn't say, "Good morning, Evin. How are you doing? Have a wonderful day." Didn't say anything like that. It was an article, a link to an article that was sent from a source that was slanted to her own way of thinking. And what did I do? I began to feel a little angry. It's kind of starting to boil under the surface there. And my first inclination was to fire something back in an angry manner. But really, it wasn't going to solve anything if I did that. I know this because I've done it before. And she and I have been down this road many, many times before. So I remember finally asking myself, okay, Evin, why is this making you feel so angry? What was it in me that was making me feel anger at that moment? And I realized that I was actually angry because she also doesn't see things my way. So later on that day, I was like, I was thinking about it and I was like, wow, I think I stumbled upon this piece of enlightenment for myself because I actually stopped to think about why I was angry rather than just kind of flying off the cuff and responding, in kind to anger or trying to make myself feel right. And it made a world of difference as to how that conversation could have gone. I also realized that by not immediately reacting, that I released a lot of tension that I was feeling in my body. And instead, I felt more peaceful. And I guarantee that if I had reacted in anger, it would have fueled that fire and it wouldn't have ended well. Neither of us is going to ever probably sway the other one. I think I have just let that go. Neither one of us is going to sway the other one, and we don't have to. We probably all know from experience, though, that continued anger results in continued tension, doesn't it? Now, remember earlier that I mentioned the journey to Jerusalem. Sometimes, in fact, most of the time, the journey isn't going to be an easy one and can often involve a trigger of some kind. That specific time for me happened to be my sister. She happened to be my trigger at that, or what she had said at that time. And let's face it, thinking back, even Jesus had one heck of a journey to Jerusalem. The Bible talks about how he traveled there on the back of a donkey. And I dare anyone to tell me that it was easy for a grown man to be riding on the back of a donkey. I mean, they're small. They're not even as big as horses. It couldn't have been comfortable. But seriously, it wasn't necessarily safe traveling on the road during that time when Jesus was said to be alive. They'd run into people that liked to rob them and other types of perils. I'm sure food was scarce. It was supposed to be desert, I believe. I'm sure water was scarce. So the journey was likely not even an easy one, even for somebody like Jesus. And one of the main reasons that Jesus even rode there in the first place was to bring peace. To show that peace was indeed possible and was something that we could achieve. Up to that point, there had been a lot of war around the area of Jerusalem. War was the trigger in Jesus riding there in the first place. And that's far too often how it is for us before we reach those stages of enlightenment. That internal war begins and becomes the catalyst, the trigger, if you will. The war begins to wage between this human side and this spiritual side that we all have. It becomes up to us to decide whether we A, start out on the journey to Jerusalem in the first place, and B, actually choose to cross the border into Jerusalem, into that place of peace and enlightenment. And one of the ways in which we can ride into Jerusalem and actually cross that border into it is to just become aware. For me, it's taking the time to really pay attention as to how I'm feeling in any given moment. To even just take a few moments each day to even just check in with myself, say, hey, maybe scan my body a little bit and see how I'm feeling physically, emotionally. Moving through anything and working on any area in my body, meditating on it or praying or whatever it takes to just kind of release some of that tension, maybe doing a mudra. And you may not find anything unpleasant, but you might. And if you do, I invite you to just sit with it. Allow it to feel. Allow yourself to feel it without any resistance. And ask yourself questions. Ask yourself why. Why is the situation interfering in your peace? And enlightenment can also appear in many other different ways. Maybe it's a change in your behavior. Maybe instead of immediately reacting to a situation like I could have done with my sister, you slow down and begin to think it through first, to reflect. Maybe it's a shift in your priorities and values. Maybe you've started building bridges between people with differences in opinion, helping them to find their oneness also and helping to bring them together. Only you will and can really know what that is for you. So the next big one that I'd like to discuss from Holy Week is the Passover, along with what it means exactly and what it symbolizes. So outwardly, the Passover has roots all the way back from the Hebrew Bible, found in the books of Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, most specifically, just to name a few. Now, Passover is one of the Jewish religion's most sacred and widely observed holidays, where a feast is shared to commemorate escape from the Egyptians. Now, according to History.com, Jews currently observe the week-long festival with a number of important rituals, including traditional Passover meals known as the Seder, the removal of leavened products from their home, the substitution of matzo for bread, and the retelling of the Exodus tale. So I also asked one of my Jewish friends, and she told me in simple terms, it is now seen and celebrated as both a birth and rebirth, along with a journey from slavery to freedom and of taking responsibility for yourself. So put in those terms, I can most definitely begin to see the spiritual symbology, if I can talk, contained within. Now, according to Charles Fillmore in his hefty metaphysical dictionary, the Passover is a mental attitude in which we are bridging over from an old state of consciousness and entering into a new. And taking on the Christ consciousness when people pass over from the mortal to the spiritual consciousness. It is a passing over or out of one state of consciousness into another. Now, he also mentioned that in every change of consciousness on the physical plane, there is a breaking down of cells and a building up of other cells to take their place. Kind of sounds a little bit like denials and affirmations a little too, doesn't it? Something that we're more familiar with. And he says mentally, this is denial and affirmation. And this process in the body is the result of these two movements in the mind. We let go the animal life and take hold of the spiritual life by giving up consciously to this passing over process, which takes place when the old cells are replaced by the new. Now, the passing of one state of consciousness, maybe one that doesn't serve us, to one that does, sounds like a really great and positive thing. And that's because it is. We've been talking about various fasts since we've entered the season of Lent a few weeks ago. Fasting from those things that don't feel good, those things that don't serve our highest good, to those things that do. And it's been my own experience that moving from one spiritual state into another can be done both consciously and subconsciously. And I'll explain that a little bit. Sometimes we set out with the intention to move from one state to the other. We're like, hey, I want to move more to the spiritual. I want to raise my consciousness a little bit. And I mentioned this earlier with the trip to Jerusalem. It can become a conscious decision to set out on that journey, on that path to enlightenment and peace, much like Jesus did. He did this consciously. And we can do the same with the passing of one state of consciousness to the other. We can set out intentionally to do the work. We can do this by consciously choosing to release or to fast from those things which no longer fit into that of our highest good. We can then choose to fill that empty space with those things that do. We can study spirituality. We can attend classes, study religion, surround ourselves with others who are on the same conscious spiritual journey. Sometimes, however, it also happens without us consciously choosing it to. Sometimes it instead chooses us, and it may occur even without us knowing about it. It may not even have the audacity or the kindness to say, hey, is this what you want to do? We may know that something is going on, but we may not know what it is exactly. And it may not always feel pleasant. Just spiritual growth, as we know, does not always feel pleasant. Sometimes instead of the realization that we are moving into a new state of consciousness, we may wonder what in the world we did wrong. Or even begin to think, oh man, karma's coming at me. It's coming at me. I knew it was going to come get me at some point or the other. And that's what I want to focus on the most right now, is the subconscious moving from one state to another. The one that leaves us puzzling, sometimes looking out the window and saying, what in the world is going on out there? Now, Unity Minister Reverend Gary Simmons, author of the book, Eye of the Storm, Embracing Conflict and Creating Peace, and co-minister of the Unity of Spokane, Washington, asked people to imagine a straight black line. He's like, just think of a straight black line. He then refers to studies where people fall either below or above that straight black line. Now, when we fall below that line, we are entrenched in fear, and we are living from that place of just letting fear run the show. We're closed off to learning new things. We begin to think, there's not enough, whether it's time, space, money, whatever it is. We believe that our story about a situation is the only right one, that others are against us, and you probably get the picture by now. However, when we're operating above that straight black line, we become aware that growing and learning are more important than being right. Other people and circumstances are our allies. They're not out to get us. They're also here for our growth as we are for them. When we're above that black line, we view life as play. And again, I'm sure you kind of start to get the picture. The thing is that we are automatically hardwired to go below that black line. That human is hardwired to automatically go below. Our brains are programmed to perceive threats, and it starts to create chemicals that want to send us below that black line. This helps us to be able to react to true threats for our physical survival. So that's what the brain is about. And as a result, our brains can't tell the difference between a physical threat or a threat to the ego. Sometimes we can be in the middle of a shift in a state of consciousness, but not know it because it feels like everything is in a state of upheaval. And at that time, it feels like nothing in this life is going right. And this is because the brain has detected a threat, and the ego is starting to feel it. It's like, oh no, there's a threat going on out there. We have to go into this, this fight mode. It immediately begins to go into survival mode, and as such, we begin to feel this inner conflict. So the first way to overcome the ego is to know that calm and peace is just on the other side of the bridge, or maybe on the other side of the border to Jerusalem, between the old and the new states of consciousness. So imagine yourself for a minute out for a beautiful hike. You're on your way and you see this most magnificent, beautiful waterfall. You walk miles and you find yourself upon a bridge. You know that your beloved waterfall is just on the other side of that bridge. You can see it just over on the other side. And all you need to do to get to it and to put your head or your hands under that water is to cross the bridge. It's unlikely that you're going to turn around and hike miles back and just leave it sitting there, knowing that that beloved waterfall's on the other side. And it's the same with us between the old and the new states of consciousness. We just need to be willing to cross that bridge and to actually do it. Thoughts from the ego are likely going to come at this time, especially right now, with current events going on in the world. They're going to likely try to plant these thoughts in your mind, these thoughts that aren't true. Thoughts that you can't, or thoughts asking yourself why you're even doing this, or why we're even experiencing this. Or maybe even thoughts that you're not deserving of good in your life, or that this time is too difficult to get through. We know that's not true. Remember, it's the ego talking. Remember, we have to go above that line or to cross over into the border of Jerusalem. So I invite you to first accept these thoughts and accept that they're going to naturally arise. Because as much as we know that we're spiritual, or that we're spirit, we're still living in this human experience. Don't mentally beat yourself up when these thoughts come. They're natural, and we all have them, or we likely wouldn't be sitting here or tuning in today. Churches and centers all over the world would likely be pretty vacant all the time. People wouldn't even be live streaming. Accept that these thoughts are natural. But I also ask you to remember that you are not your thoughts. These thoughts are but an illusion. They are but fleeting moments in the grand scheme of things in your life. You're not scorn. You're not fear. You're not anger or self-doubt. Begin to separate you from these thoughts, and they will also begin to separate from you. You are not your thoughts. Participate in a mindfulness or a mindful activity. For me, it's doing a puzzle of some sort, or writing, or petting one of our dogs. Maybe even sometimes even just washing dishes by hand can put me into that state of mindfulness. Something that brings you into the present moment of what you're doing. And to end, next year, I have automatically the answer of what Holy Week is without even thinking about it, because I've talked about it up here today. And when somebody asks me what I'm doing to prepare for Holy Week, I'm not just going to stop there. Because we know that we're more than a week, right? We know we can be holy or connected to our Christ consciousness for so much more than a week. We're more than just a holiday, whether it's Palm Sunday or Easter. We're more than that. We know that we're more of a season, more than just a season, because we are. We're spirit. And in that knowledge, there's no room for fear. There's no room for anything but love and all that's true, all that meets our highest good. You know what those are: peace, joy, strength, wisdom, and anything else that's good. We're all here to share those wonderful things with each other and with ourselves. The thing you have to ask yourself as you're starting to approach that border of Jerusalem is, are you ready? I know I am, and I hope that you'll all join me. Namaste. All right. And a couple of things I wanted to talk about. Now, a couple of weeks ago, and I meant to make this announcement last week, and it just kind of left my mind when I was up here, but we had a board meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure we can kind of fill you in on that, maybe an email or more when we attend, but we did elect new board officers, so I wanted to share that with you all today. Steve Roberts was elected as our board president. Dwight Tell was elected as our vice president. And for some reason, my mind is, Nancy Sundahl was elected as our treasurer, and she graciously volunteered, so thank you, Nancy. And then Jean Tupper also graciously volunteered and was elected as our board secretary. So those are our new officers, and we welcome all of our new folks to the board and all of our new officers, and we know that together we're going to do a great job and help move this church towards our vision and our goals. And now I do want to, as we prepare our tithes and offerings, I ask you to just continue to remember that we may be live streaming, but our building is still here, and we've still got staff coming in and helping to hold these wonderful live streaming services. So I ask that you just remember that as you prepare your tithes and